The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of downtown Portland as Thomas Hamilton walked hand in hand with his 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Their footsteps echoed softly against the old brick buildings that lined the historic district. Thomas had always loved this part of the city, where time seemed to move more slowly and the weight of his business empire felt lighter on his shoulders. Emma skipped beside him, her blonde hair bouncing with each step. She wore her favorite cream-colored coat, the one that made her feel grown-up and important. Today was special. Thomas had promised to take her to the new art museum, just the two of them. These moments together had become precious since her mother had passed away 3 years ago. The loss of Sarah had changed everything. Thomas threw himself into his work, building his technology company into a multi-million-dollar empire. Success came easily, but happiness remained elusive. Emma was his anchor, the one bright light that kept him grounded in a world that often felt cold and distant. As they walked past the old cathedral, its stone steps worn smooth by countless visitors over the decades, Emma suddenly stopped. Her small hand tightened around her father's fingers, and she pointed toward the church entrance. "Dad, look," she whispered, her voice carrying a note of confusion and wonder. Thomas followed her gaze to where a woman sat huddled on the cathedral steps. She was wrapped in layers of worn clothing, a faded green jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands, partially obscuring her face. In her hands, she held a small cardboard sign that read simply, "Please help." The woman looked up at that moment, perhaps sensing their attention. Her eyes, deep brown and haunting, met Thomas's across the morning light. Time seemed to freeze in that instant, the bustling sounds of the city fading to a distant hum. Emma's grip on her father's hand became almost painful. "Dad?" she said again, her voice barely audible. "That homeless woman, she looks just like Mom." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He stared at the woman, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The shape of her face, the curve of her mouth, the way she held her head, it was impossible, yet undeniable. The resemblance to Sarah was striking, almost uncanny. The woman seemed to recognize something in his stare. She slowly pushed herself to her feet, the cardboard sign fluttering to the ground. As she stood, the morning light caught her features more clearly, and Thomas felt the world begin to spin around him. "Sarah," he whispered, so quietly that only Emma could hear, but it couldn't be Sarah. Sarah was gone. He had held her hand as she took her last breath in the hospital room 3 years ago. He had arranged her funeral, spoken at her memorial service, visited her grave every month since. This was impossible. The woman on the steps took a hesitant step forward, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. She moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid that any sudden motion might shatter the moment like glass. "Thomas?" she said, and her voice carried across the space between them, like a ghost from the past. The sound of his name spoken in that familiar tone was too much. Thomas felt his knees buckle, his vision blurring at the edges. The last thing he remembered was Emma's frightened cry as he collapsed onto the cold cobblestones. When Thomas opened his eyes, he was lying on a bench inside the cathedral. The cool stone walls surrounded him, and shafts of colored light streamed through the stained glass windows. Emma sat beside him, her small hand resting on his arm, her face pale with worry. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Thomas sat up slowly, his head still spinning. The events outside came rushing back to him, and he looked around, frantically. "Where is she? The woman on the steps?" "She's here," said a gentle voice from behind him. Thomas turned to see the woman standing a few feet away, still wrapped in her worn green jacket. In the soft light of the cathedral, her resemblance to Sarah was even more striking, but there were differences too. Her face was thinner, marked by hardship and time. Her hands were rougher, her posture more guarded. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to frighten you or your daughter. My name is Rebecca Chen. I know I look like someone." "You knew?" Thomas struggled to understand. "But you look exactly like my wife, Sarah. She died 3 years ago." Rebecca nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to echo his own. "I know about Sarah Hamilton. I've been following the news about your family for years. You see, Sarah was my twin sister." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning an impossible chasm. Thomas felt Emma's hand tighten on his arm as she tried to process this revelation. "Twin sister," Thomas repeated, his voice barely functional. "We were separated when we were babies," Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger. "Adopted by different families. I only learned about Sarah a few years ago, when I saw her obituary in the newspaper. By then it was too late to meet her, to know her." Thomas's mind raced, trying to piece together this impossible puzzle. Sarah had never mentioned having a twin sister. But then again, she might not have known either. "I've been living on the streets for the past year," Rebecca continued. "Lost my job, lost my apartment. I've walked past your office building dozens of times, wondering if I should try to contact you. But what would I say? Hello? I'm the sister your wife never knew she had?" Emma stood up suddenly, her young face serious and determined. She walked over to Rebecca and took her hand without hesitation. "You're our family," she declared with the simple certainty that only children possess. "If you were Mom's sister, then you're my aunt, and family doesn't live on the street." Thomas looked at his daughter, amazed by her wisdom and compassion. In that moment he saw Sarah in Emma's gesture, in her open heart and generous spirit. "Emma's right," Thomas said, standing up and approaching Rebecca carefully. "If you truly are Sarah's twin sister, then you're family, and family belongs together." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want your charity. I don't want your money." "This isn't about money," Thomas replied gently. "This is about Emma having a chance to know the aunt she never knew existed. It's about healing for all of us." Over the following weeks, Rebecca slowly became part of their lives. DNA tests confirmed what their hearts already knew. She was, indeed, Sarah's identical twin. Thomas helped Rebecca find a small apartment nearby and supported her as she got back on her feet and found work at a local community center. Emma flourished with Rebecca in their lives. She would spend hours listening to stories about Sarah's childhood, stories that Rebecca had pieced together through her own research and imagination. In return, Emma shared memories of her mother, helping Rebecca understand the woman her sister had become. For Thomas, Rebecca's presence brought both comfort and healing. She wasn't Sarah, she was her own person, with her own experiences and struggles. But through her, he found a new connection to the woman he had loved and lost. The hole in their family began to fill, not with replacement, but with new love and understanding. As autumn painted the Portland streets in shades of gold and red, Thomas often found himself walking the same cobblestone path where they had first encountered Rebecca. The cathedral steps were empty now, but the memory of that morning remained vivid. Sometimes the most profound changes in our lives come disguised as ordinary moments. A walk with our child, a chance encounter, a moment of recognition that changes everything. For Thomas and Emma, that morning had brought them more than they could have imagined. Not just the return of someone they thought they had lost, but the discovery of family they never knew existed. In the end, love had found a way to bridge the impossible gap between loss and hope, creating something new and beautiful from the ashes of grief.